When we think of England's kings, names like Henry VIII, Richard the Lionheart, or William the Conqueror often come to mind. But what about the women who wore the crown in their own right? Not as consorts standing beside a king, but as sovereigns holding power themselves. Their stories are fewer in number, yet they are some of the most dramatic, bloody, and transformative in British history. From a disputed 12th century claimant who fought a civil war to two of the longest reigning monarchs the world has ever seen, these are the queens who ruled England. Our story begins not with a crowned queen, but with a woman who came agonizingly close. Empress Matilda was the daughter of Henry I, a king who desperately needed a male heir. When his only legitimate son died in a shipwreck, Henry did something radical for the time. He forced his barons to swear loyalty to his daughter as his successor. But when Henry died, the throne was seized by her cousin Stephen, plunging England into a long and brutal civil war that later generations would call the Anarchy. Matilda did not sit quietly in exile. She fought back with armies, political alliances, and sheer force of will. In 1141, she captured Stephen and briefly held power as Lady of the English, controlling London and preparing for her coronation. Yet just before she could be crowned, the mood in the capital turned against her, and she was driven out. She never formally became queen, but her struggle laid the groundwork for the eventual reign of her son, Henry II. Matilda's life was a sign that a woman could fight for a throne, even if the crown itself would remain just beyond her grasp. Centuries later, the question of a woman's right to rule would erupt again, this time with deadly consequences. In 1553, the young King Edward VI lay dying. To prevent his Catholic half-sister Mary from taking the crown, a group of powerful nobles concocted a desperate plan. They placed Lady Jane Grey, a great-granddaughter of Henry VII, on the throne. Jane was exceptionally well-educated and deeply devout, but she was also a 16-year-old pawn in a high-stakes political game. Her reign lasted just 9 days. She entered the Tower of London as a queen and would never leave it alive. As Mary gathered overwhelming support across the country, the Privy Council swiftly abandoned Jane. She was deposed, tried for treason, and eventually executed. Jane's tragic story is a sobering reminder that the path to the English throne could be as dangerous as it was brief, especially for a young woman used by ambitious men. Jane Grey's 9 days cleared the way for England's first fully recognized queen regnant. Mary I rode into London to widespread acclaim, determined to rule in her own right. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and she had endured years of humiliation after her father broke with Rome and declared her illegitimate. Now she was determined to restore Catholicism and return England to what she saw as the true faith. Her methods, however, were ruthless. Mary revived the laws against heresy and oversaw the burning of around 300 Protestants, a campaign that earned her the lasting nickname Bloody Mary. Her reign was also marked by a deeply unpopular marriage to Philip of Spain and a failed war that lost Calais, England's last territory in France. Yet for all the religious fires and political storms, Mary's queenship proved something critical. A woman could occupy the English throne and exercise full sovereign power. When she died in 1558, the crown passed to her half-sister, a young woman who would transform the nation. That half-sister was Elizabeth I, and her reign would become legendary. Elizabeth inherited a kingdom deeply divided by religion, burdened by debt and surrounded by powerful enemies. What she built over the next 44 years was nothing less than a golden age. Intelligent, politically brilliant, and fiercely independent, Elizabeth refused to marry and surrender her authority to any husband. She made herself the Virgin Queen, married only to England. Under her rule, the Spanish Armada was famously defeated in 1588, a victory that boosted English national pride to soaring heights. Her court became a dazzling center of culture, producing writers like William Shakespeare and explorers such as Francis Drake. Elizabeth's reign brought a sense of stability, identity, and confidence that shaped the country's image for centuries. When she died without an heir, the Tudor dynasty ended, but she left behind a nation that had learned to see a queen on the throne not as a weakness, but as a source of strength. Almost a century later, another woman would come to power, but this time alongside her husband. Mary II became queen after a remarkable event known as the Glorious Revolution. Her father, James II, had alienated much of the political establishment with his Catholicism and authoritarian style. In 1688, a group of Protestant nobles invited Mary's Dutch husband, William of Orange, to invade England. James fled, and Parliament offered the crown to William and Mary as joint sovereigns. This was a constitutional turning point. Mary was not a mere consort. She co-ruled with equal legal status. During William's frequent absences on military campaigns, she governed with competence and a gentle touch that helped stabilize the new regime. Their joint reign produced the Bill of Rights in 1689, a document that fundamentally rebalanced power between the monarch and Parliament. Mary's death from smallpox in 1694 at the age of just 32 deeply grieved the nation, but the constitutional framework she and William established would endure. After William's death, the crown passed to Mary's sister, Anne. Anne was the last Stuart monarch, and her reign witnessed one of the most significant political transformations in the history of these islands. She was a woman who endured immense personal tragedy, suffering multiple pregnancies and the loss of all her children, a grief that haunted her life. Yet, on the public stage, she oversaw the passage of the 1707 Act of Union, which merged the kingdoms of England and Scotland into a single new entity, Great Britain. This was not just a symbolic change. It created a new political and economic powerhouse. Anne's reign also saw brilliant military victories in the War of the Spanish Succession, with the Duke of Marlborough leading her armies. She continued to reign as the first sovereign of a united Great Britain until her death in 1714, bringing the Stuart line to a quiet end. Anne's legacy is the very shape of the nation as we know it today. More than a century later, a young woman of just 18 woke to the news that she was queen. Victoria would go on to rule for 63 years, giving her name to an entire era. Her reign coincided with the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of the British Empire to its territorial peak. Victoria became Empress of India, a title that symbolized the global reach of British power. But her influence was also deeply personal. She and her beloved husband Albert shaped a model of family values and respectability that defined Victorian morality. After Albert's early death, her prolonged mourning changed the nation's rituals of grief and made the image of the black-clad widow iconic. Under Victoria, Britain underwent staggering transformations, from railways and factories to new ideas about politics, science, and society. When she died in 1901, it felt to many as if an anchor had been lifted from the world. The Victorian age had ended, and the modern 20th century stood on the doorstep. If Victoria embodied an age of empire and confidence, the next queen regnant would come to symbolize stability in an age of uncertainty. Elizabeth II ascended the throne in 1952 and went on to become Britain's longest-reigning monarch, a record of 70 years that may never be broken. Her reign stretched from the age of Winston Churchill to the era of the smartphone, from the last gasps of empire to a modern multicultural Britain. She witnessed the Suez Crisis, the Cold War, the moon landing, the Troubles, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the upheavals of Brexit. Through it all, she remained a constant, never giving an interview that revealed her personal opinions, yet broadcasting a steady, reassuring presence at Christmas and national moments. The decolonization of Africa and the Caribbean, scandals within her own family, and a rapidly changing media landscape tested the monarchy like never before. Yet at her death, the outpouring of grief showed just how deeply she had woven herself into the fabric of national life. Elizabeth II had become not just a queen, but a living bridge across generations. Looking back at these 8 women, patterns begin to emerge. The path to the throne was never smooth. It involved civil war, execution threats, political coups, and personal sacrifice. Some, like Matilda and Jane Grey, never received their crowns fully, while others like Elizabeth I and Victoria defined the very identity of their ages. What connects them all is the immense pressure of ruling as a woman in a world that often doubted their legitimacy. Each had to navigate male-dominated councils, public expectations about marriage and motherhood, and the symbolic weight of wearing the crown. And yet, from the smoke of the anarchy to the digital broadcasts of the 21st century, they held that crown and shaped the history of England and Britain in ways few kings could match. Their stories remind us that power does not have a single gender, and that the throne has sometimes been at its most remarkable when occupied by a queen. So the next time you see the image of a monarch on a coin or a stamp, remember the centuries of remarkable women who fought, ruled, and endured to make that image possible.